Now, continuing with our coverage of the Kenyan attack, it's not yet clear how this will impact the country's economic prospects, at least in the near term. However, in the long term, Kenya's economic prospects are good, according to the World Bank and other economic organizations. Now, joining us to delve a little bit deeper into the subject is Brian Dlamini, who's the sovereign risk analyst at Rand Merchant Bank. Brian, thank you so much for joining us today. Just an overview, roughly, when you take a look at the situation and draw your conclusions rather quickly, what kind of impact could these shootings have on Kenya's economy in the long run?
So if you look at it in the long run, there's quite a bit of momentum, positive momentum still built into the economy. So this falls, within what we look at, as assigning a risk premium on the country. So in that risk premium, this has been largely factored in. So this won't, the country won't come to a standstill because they've had this. But it is actually a noteworthy attack in the sense that a different method is being used by the Al-Shabaab this time around. So it's requiring, I suppose, the external investor or someone outside to take a moment to sit back and reevaluate if, that risk premium that you assigned is actually, enough for doing business further in the country.
Brian, take us a couple of steps back. You mentioned that foreign investors won't be deterred by this kind of activity, and we see that as we spoke to our market commentator a few moments ago. But where exactly does this conflict between Kenya and Somalia come from?
So, I mean, we've seen this movie play itself out, say, over the last two years. So Kenya is involved in a war against terror in Somalia. The forces called UNISOM forces in Somalia. And in retaliation, the Al-Shabaab said, or they've concluded that the only way to get Kenya to stop, their cleansing of terror, as it were, in Somalia is to, have these type of attacks. But then, like I said, this is different. Previously, you'd get a bag or a little device being dropped off at the bus stop.
Like in the US, hey?
Yes, and that explodes, it would detonate, and it would have limited impact. And because the Al-Shabaab, I suppose, would think they would attack places where security would be lax. This time around, there's hostages involved. It's gone, over a period of a couple of days, and it's causing quite a bit of concern. So there is, the feeling at the present moment that, hey, wait a minute, there's a change of style here.
Now, obviously, you've just said, Brian, as well, that this isn't news. These attacks sort of happened in a similar fashion, 98, 2002. But we're getting to a point now where it's becoming too often. You've had, obviously, what happened earlier at the airport earlier this year, and now later in the same year. And you assign a risk factor, if you want to call it that. But how does that play out in the big scheme of things? You have an investor who, yes, may be a long-term player, but in the long term has seen his investment not go the way he wants. How does the tourism sector, for one, play itself out in this instance?
Well, I think at the moment investors are having to cope with a lot. So this is not the only deterrent for investment. We've got the ICC trial, but then to counterbalance all these things is that the economy is doing well. They had elections in March that went off very well, better than expected. There's a new constitution. Things are looking positive. So there's a lot of counterweights to these type of actions happening. What it does, though, it causes a stop-and-start way of doing business. Because, let's say, with this type of attack, you will have roadblocks now in the country and delays in transporting your goods and stuff like that. So all of a sudden you have to cope with these new changes, and that ultimately will impact the cost of doing business and make your life a little bit more unbearable, as it were. But it wouldn't really, lead you to shut down your business. It would just make things
continue doing business in this time, let's call it that. I mean, I want to compare this to the time in Nigeria when they had Boko Haram, obviously, and they were obviously in a turmoil as well there, and petrol prices well shot up as well. So, there are many factors in that, and yet the country continued to move forward. So are you saying that the exact same is likely to happen in this case?
So a similar situation is likely to happen. I had a discussion with a colleague of mine who covers West Africa, and we had a debate about the Boko Haram versus, Al-Shabaab scenario. And, just that touch on a couple of things. In Nigeria, the Boko Haram, it's an internally driven, insurgent, or rather type of insurgency. So it's a man on the street, there's a bit of social issues, etc. In Kenya, it's primarily driven by, Al-Shabaab, who comes from outside, attacking the country. And the way to deal with this for Kenya is basically continue the way they've been doing, or step up the efforts. We took quite a bit of comfort. Before the elections, there was about 1,005 troops from the US, security agents who arrived from the US to try and help the country to deal with the situation. So that's why there was a slowdown, because these agents were able to kind of pinpoint where, through their own intelligence, obviously, where things would go wrong or where these attacks would happen. But clearly, this time around, there's an escalation. So these, or the Al-Shabaab, has gone back and they've done their homework yet again, and there's need for government to maybe go back to base and re-look at the situation and see, how best to deal with it. Because I think it can become quite a bit of an irritation if it continues or escalates from this point onwards.